The sun hung low in the sky, baking the cracked asphalt of Maple Ridge's backroads. Anika sat at her milk cart, a rickety wooden stand painted white, though most of the paint had peeled away over the years. The cooler beside her held 6 glass bottles of milk, their labels faded and damp with condensation. Flies buzzed lazily around the cart, drawn to the sweetness of spilled milk. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of dirt across her sunburnt face. Her hands were raw from scrubbing bottles all morning. Her knuckles cracked and red. At 16, Anika had grown used to the rhythm of waiting. The creak of the cart's wheels when the wind stirred, the faint metallic clink of coins dropping into the jar, the sound of her mother's cough echoing from the house up the hill, each hack a reminder of the debt that loomed over them like a storm cloud. 5 days. That was all she had left before the loan shark came for the farm. She stared at the jar of coins on the cart. 12.43s, it wasn't enough. Not even close. The truckers who once stopped for her. Father's milk no longer came through. Maple Ridge. They'd found newer highways. Faster routes. The fields behind the house were overgrown with weeds, the cows long gone. Her father's grave was a mound of dirt behind the barn, marked only by a wooden cross. And her mother. Her mother hadn't left bed in weeks, her body too weak to fight off the pneumonia that had taken hold after Papa's death. Anika clenched her fists, trying to steady her trembling hands. She hated this feeling, the helplessness, the weight of it all pressing down on her chest. She glanced at the cooler. The last bottle of milk sat there, sweating in the heat. She'd skimmed the cream that morning, hiding it in a tin under the cart to sell later in town. The guilt gnawed at her, sour and sharp like curdled milk. She told herself it wasn't stealing, it was survival. But deep down she knew better. A shadow fell across the cart. Anika looked up. A man stood at the edge of the road, his figure tall and gaunt. He wore a coat too heavy for the heat, its fabric frayed at the cuffs. A jagged scar ran down the side of his jaw, cutting through stubble and weathered skin. His eyes were cold and calculating, the color of storm clouds. A pocket watch chain glinted at his waist as he shifted his weight. 1 bottle, he said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding against stone. Anika hesitated. The last bottle sat in the cooler, its glass fogged with condensation. She'd skimmed the cream, she couldn't give it away now. But something about the man's presence made her uneasy. There was an intensity to him, a quiet danger that made her pulse quicken. $5, she blurted, holding out the bottle. The man studied her, his gaze lingering on her trembling hands, the jar of coins, the way her shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. For a moment she thought he might laugh or snap at her. Instead, he reached into his coat and dropped a tarnished coin into the jar. It clinked against the others, its surface etched with a symbol, a serpent swallowing its own tail. Keep the change, he said, and walked on. Anika stared after him, her heart pounding. The coin felt wrong, its weight unnatural, but when she lifted the empty bottle to put it away, a crisp $5 bill fluttered out, its edges sharp and new. 10 years passed. Anika was 26 now, working at a diner in the city. The farm was gone, swallowed by the loan shark's men after she'd failed to pay the debt. Her mother was buried beside her father, the funeral paid for by tips from strangers who didn't know her name. The $5 bill from the drifter sat tucked inside her Bible at home, brittle and yellowed with age. It was a relic, a reminder of a kindness she'd never understood. Life in the city was different, but no easier. The diner where she worked smelled of grease and despair, the kind of place where people came to forget their troubles rather than solve them. Anika served coffee to customers who barely looked at her, cleaning tables sticky with syrup and ketchup. Her uniform itched, the polyester clinging uncomfortably to her skin. At night, she returned to a cramped apartment above a laundromat, its walls paper-thin and its plumbing faulty. The dreams of rebuilding Maple Ridge had faded over time, replaced by the grim reality of survival. But then one evening, as she wiped down tables at the diner, the news caught her attention. On the small TV mounted above the counter, a reporter stood in front of a gleaming corporate headquarters. Billionaire Elias, Voss has made headlines again for his unconventional philanthropy, the reporter said. His company, Serpent Holdings, is buying up struggling towns across the country, paying off debts and revitalizing communities. Anika froze. The logo on the screen, a serpent swallowing its tail, was identical to the symbol on the tarnished coin. What's up, Annie? Carl, the fry cook, glanced at her. You look like you've seen a ghost. Nothing, she muttered, but her mind raced. The drifter, the $5 the coin. Could it be the same man? That night she dug out the Bible and carefully unfolded the $5 bill. The edges were frayed, the paper fragile. She stared at it for a long time before finally making up her mind. The next morning, Anika stood outside the towering glass building that housed Serpent Holdings. Her heart pounded as she approached the reception desk, her best blouse clinging uncomfortably to her skin. "I need to speak to Mr. Voss," she said, her voice tight. The receptionist smiled politely but shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Voss doesn't see walk-ins. Tell him it's about Maple Ridge, 2013. The smile faltered. The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone. Anika waited, her palms slick with sweat. A security camera pivoted slightly, its lens catching her face. Moments later, a man appeared at the top of the staircase. Tall, scarred, unmistakable. It was him, the drifter. He descended the stairs slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. "Miss," he began, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. "Anika," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "We met 10 years ago. You bought a bottle of milk from me." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Ah, the girl with the cart." "Yes," she said, "and I think it's time we talked." They sat in his office. The city sprawled below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Elias leaned back in his chair, studying her with those same storm cloud eyes. "You hid something in that milk bottle," he said finally. "A microchip containing evidence against my family. My brother's men were after me. You saved my life without even knowing it." Anika stared at him, stunned. "What?" "The $5 bill wasn't payment," he continued. "It was a marker. A debt I owed you, and now I'm here to repay it." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents clearing her mother's medical bills, a deed to the farm, and blueprints for Maple Ridge's revival. "But there's a catch," he said, his tone careful. "If I rebuild your town, you'll have to testify against my brother in court. Expose the accounts. But that means exposing your role in the chip's discovery, including the skimmed cream." Anika's stomach twisted. The guilt she'd carried for 10 years rose up like bile. "And if I say no?" she asked quietly. "Then nothing changes," he said. "Your town stays dead, your debts stay unpaid, and my brother stays free." She took a deep breath. "And if I say yes? Then we both get what we want." Anika stared at the folder, her mind racing. Finally, she nodded. "Let's do it." The courtroom buzzed with tension. Anika stepped to the stand, her hand shaking as she recounted the story. The skimmed cream, the $5, the chip. Elias watched from the back, his scar a pale line in the shadows. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot, sealing the verdict. Convictions fell like dominoes. That night, Anika stood at the edge of the farm, now surrounded by construction crews and fresh soil. Elias approached, holding a check. "Your terms," he said. "The town's revival will prioritize local hires. Your mother's clinic will be rebuilt first." She took the check, then handed him the $5 bill. No, this was never about money. Behind them, workers refurbished her old milk cart, its peeling paint gleaming under new varnish. A symbol adorned the side, a serpent swallowing its tail, now altered to hold a drop of milk in its mouth. Elias nodded, a flicker of respect in his gaze. "What now?" Anika smiled for the first time in years. "Now we rebuild." Maple Ridge began to stir from its long slumber. Construction crews swarmed the town like bees building a hive, their tools clanging against the quiet that had settled over the land for years. Anika stood at the edge of what had once been her family's farm, now a sprawling construction site. Bulldozers churned up the overgrown fields, and fresh lumber lay stacked in neat rows. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, a sharp contrast to the stale despair that had hung over the town for so long. Elias Voss had kept his word. Within weeks, the first families who had fled Maple Ridge during its darkest days began to trickle back. Some came out of curiosity, others out of desperation, but all were welcomed by Anika, who had taken on the role of unofficial spokesperson for the town's revival. She walked the streets with a clipboard, jotting down names, needs, and dreams. Her hands still bore the scars of her past, cracked, knuckles and calloused palms. But there was a new energy in her step, a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there in years. The old milk cart became the centerpiece of the town square, refurbished and gleaming under the sun. Workers had painted it a clean white, its peeling surface replaced with smooth, polished wood. A local artist added a mural to the side, a serpent swallowing its tail. but with a drop of milk in its mouth, symbolizing resilience and renewal. Anika ran her fingers over the design, marveling at how far they'd come. But not everyone was happy about the changes. Old Mrs. Hargrove sat on her porch, knitting needles clicking as she watched the commotion across the street. She was one of the few who had stayed in Maple Ridge through its decline, stubbornly clinging to her crumbling house and memories of better days. Now, she scowled at the sight of strangers hauling equipment into town. "Mark my words," she muttered to her cat, which lounged lazily on the railing. "This is trouble. That Voss man thinks he can waltz in here with his fancy money and fix everything. He doesn't know us, doesn't care about us." Her sentiments weren't unique. While many embraced the revival, others whispered behind closed doors. They questioned Elias's motives, his sudden interest in a forgotten town. Was he really a philanthropist, or was this just another scheme? And then there was Anika, once a girl selling milk on the roadside, now the face of Maple Ridge's rebirth. Some admired her grit, but others resented her newfound prominence. "You think you're special now?" snapped Tommy Wilkins, a former classmate of Anika's who had returned after hearing about the changes. He leaned against the counter at the diner where she still worked part-time, his tone dripping with bitterness. "You're just his puppet, aren't you? Playing nice while he pulls the strings." Anika stiffened but forced herself to smile. "It's not about me, Tommy, it's about the town. About giving people a second chance." Tommy snorted. "Second chances don't come free. Someone always pays the price." His words lingered in her mind long after he left. As the town rebuilt, secrets began to surface. Not just Anika's, though hers remained a constant weight, but others buried beneath Maple Ridge's soil. One afternoon, while workers dug foundations for a new community center, they unearthed an old metal box. Inside were faded photographs, letters, and documents detailing shady land deals from decades ago. Names appeared that shocked even the oldest residents. Among them was Mr. Kovac, the loan shark who had seized Anika's farm. His involvement in corrupt schemes stretched back years, implicating half the town's former leaders. When the news broke, whispers turned to outrage. People who had once feared him now demanded justice. Anika found herself at the center of it all again. Elias called her to his office, his expression grim. "This complicates things," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of the documents, along with notes connecting Kovac to Elias's brother. "You knew?" Anika asked, her voice tight. "I suspected," Elias admitted. "But I didn't have proof until now. What happens next?" "That depends on you," he said. "If we expose Kovac, it'll tear apart what little trust remains in this town. But if we stay silent, we let him win," Anika finished. Elias nodded. "And your choice?" She stared at the folder, her chest tight. "We do what's right, no matter the cost." The town hall was packed that evening, chairs spilling into the aisles. Faces ranged from hopeful to hostile, each person carrying their own baggage. Anika stood at the front, flanked by Elias and a lawyer, brought in to oversee the investigation. "We've uncovered evidence of corruption," she began, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Not just from outsiders, but from within our own community. It's painful, yes, but it's also an opportunity to heal, to rebuild, to hold ourselves accountable." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others crossed their arms. Mrs. Hargrove raised a hand, her knitting needles tucked into her sweater. "And what about you, girl?" she demanded. "What skeletons are hiding in your closet?" Anika swallowed hard. "I skimmed cream to sell on the side when I was 16. I thought I was saving my family, but I was stealing. If anyone wants to judge me for that, go ahead. But I'm here now, trying to make things right for all of us." Silence fell. Slowly, heads began to nod. Weeks turned into months. The town transformed before Anika's eyes. New homes replaced dilapidated ones, businesses reopened, and laughter filled the streets again. Yet progress came with pain. Old wounds reopened as truths came to light. Families argued, friendships fractured, and some chose to leave rather than confront the past. Through it all, Anika remained steadfast. She worked tirelessly, mediating disputes, organizing events, and ensuring no one was left behind. Elias visited occasionally, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. Their relationship was complicated, a mix of gratitude, respect, and unspoken tension. One evening, as they stood beside the milk cart watching the sunset, Elias spoke. "You've done well," he said. Better than I expected. It wasn't just me, Anika replied. It was everyone, together. He smiled faintly. Still, you're remarkable. Most people would have given up. And most billionaires wouldn't have cared, she countered. They shared a moment of quiet understanding before Elias turned to leave. As his car disappeared down the road, Anika felt a pang of sadness. Whatever bond they had forged, it was fleeting. As Maple Ridge flourished, shadows from Anika's past began to creep back into her life. The trial against Elias's brother had been swift and decisive, its verdict sealing the fate of a corrupt empire. But justice wasn't without consequence. Rumors spread about threats made in dark corners, whispers that those who dared expose the truth might face retaliation. Anika tried to brush it off, focusing on the town's progress, but late at night, when the streets were empty and the wind howled through the trees, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One evening, as she closed up the diner, a figure stepped out of the shadows near the alley. Her heart leapt into her throat, but it was only Tommy Wilkins. His expression was unreadable, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. "Can I help you?" she asked, forcing calm into her voice. "I heard something," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "About Kovacs. Word is, his people aren't happy about what happened. They're looking for someone to blame." Anika frowned. "And you're telling me this because—" Tommy hesitated, then sighed. "Look, I may not like you much, but I don't want to see anyone get hurt. Just be careful, okay?" She nodded slowly. "Thanks." He turned to leave, but before disappearing into the darkness, he added, "Oh, and Anika, maybe stop acting like you're the only one trying to save this place." His words stung, but they lingered long after he was gone. A week later, another stranger arrived in Maple Ridge. Unlike Elias, this man didn't announce his presence with helicopters or corporate logos. He came quietly, slipping into town under the cover of dusk. Tall and lean, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes, he introduced himself as Victor Kane, a journalist writing a feature on small-town revivals. Victor quickly ingratiated himself with the townsfolk, asking questions and taking notes, with an easy charm that disarmed even the most skeptical residents. He seemed particularly interested in Anika, often showing up at the diner or lingering near the milk cart during events. At first, she found him irritating, too eager, too curious, but there was something genuine about his interest in Maple Ridge's story. "You've done incredible work here," he told her one afternoon as they sat on the steps of the newly built library. "It's inspiring." Anika shrugged. "I just did what needed doing." "And yet you're the one everyone looks to now," he said, his tone thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like it's too much? Like maybe you're carrying the weight of the whole town?" She glanced at him sharply. "Why do you ask?" He smiled faintly. "Just wondering if you've thought about letting others share the load." Before she could respond, Mrs. Hargrove called out from across the square, waving frantically. "Anika, phone call for you." Excusing herself, Anika hurried toward the general store, where a landline had been set up temporarily. When she picked up the receiver, Elias's voice greeted her, low and urgent. "There's trouble brewing," he said without preamble. "Victor Kane isn't who he says he is." Elias explained that Victor Kane was a private investigator, hired by remnants of his brother's organization. Their goal, to discredit Anika and destabilize Maple Ridge's revival. "They'll use anything they can find against you," Elias warned. "Your past, your decisions, it's all fair game." Anika felt sick. She'd trusted Victor, allowed him into their lives, shared stories she hadn't told anyone else. How much damage could he do? "What do I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "For now, keep your distance," Elias advised. "And let me handle this." But Anika wasn't one to sit idly by while danger loomed. That night, she confronted Victor outside the motel where he was staying. The streetlights cast long shadows across the parking lot, illuminating his startled expression as she approached. "You lied to us," she accused, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Victor held up his hands in surrender. "Anika, wait." "No," she snapped. "Who are you really? And why are you here?" He hesitated, then sighed. "You're right. My name isn't Victor Kane. I was sent here to dig up dirt on you, to find weaknesses they could exploit." Her stomach churned. "And did you?" Victor met her gaze, his eyes conflicted. "Yes, but I didn't give them anything." "Why should I believe you?" "Because I saw what you've done for this town," he said earnestly. "How hard you've worked to make things right. It made me question everything I thought I knew about my job and myself." Anika wanted to believe him, but trust didn't come easily anymore. Against her better judgment, Anika decided to give Victor a chance. Together, they devised a plan to turn the tables on his employers. Using information he'd gathered during his investigation, they would expose the remaining members of the corrupt network, dismantling it once and for all. Elias agreed to assist, leveraging his resources to gather evidence and secure legal backing. For weeks, they worked in secret, piecing together documents, tracing connections, and building a case strong enough to withstand scrutiny. Tension ran high, each step forward fraught with risk. Meanwhile, tensions in Maple Ridge grew. Some residents noticed Anika's preoccupation and questioned her commitment to the town. Others sensed something was amiss and rallied around her, offering support in ways both big and small. "You're not alone in this," Mrs. Hargrove told her one evening, surprising Anika with her kindness. "Whatever it is, we've got your back." Her words brought tears to Anika's eyes. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than expected. An anonymous tip led authorities to a hidden safe house on the outskirts of town, where several key figures in the corruption scandal were arrested. Evidence surfaced linking them to illegal activities spanning decades, implicating not only Kovac but also powerful allies within the government. Victor played a crucial role in the takedown, risking his own safety to ensure the operation succeeded. Though grateful, Anika knew he couldn't stay in Maple Ridge, not after everything that had happened. On the morning he left, she walked him to his car, unsure of what to say. "Take care of yourself," she finally managed. "You too," he replied, smiling softly. "And thanks for trusting me even when I didn't deserve it." As his car disappeared down the road, Anika felt a flicker of hope. The fight wasn't over, but they'd won a significant battle. With the arrests of Kovac and his associates, Maple Ridge began to breathe easier. The constant specter of corruption had been lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism that hadn't existed in years. People walked the streets with lighter steps, their conversations filled more with laughter than whispers of fear. Yet beneath this newfound peace, cracks remained, old wounds that refused to fully heal. Anika found herself stretched thin once again. While the immediate threat was gone, rebuilding trust within the community proved harder than she'd anticipated. Some residents still harbored resentment toward her, blaming her for stirring up trouble, or accusing her of playing favorites during the town's revival. Others simply couldn't move past the betrayal of those they'd once trusted. At night, when the diner closed and the milk cart stood silent under the stars, Anika allowed herself moments of doubt. Was she doing enough? Could she ever truly make amends for the choices she'd made as a desperate 16-year-old? She often wondered if she'd taken on too much, if the weight of leadership was something she could sustain without breaking. But every time these thoughts threatened to overwhelm her, someone would remind her why she kept going. It might be Mrs. Hargrove dropping off a casserole just because, or Tommy Wilkins, grudgingly admitting that her efforts had brought jobs back to town. These small acts of kindness reminded her that progress wasn't perfection, it was persistence. One crisp autumn morning, Elias Voss returned to Maple Ridge. His arrival was unexpected. He hadn't visited since the trial against his brother concluded months earlier. When Anika saw him stepping out of a sleek black car near the milk cart, her heart skipped a beat. He looked different somehow, less like the enigmatic billionaire and more like the scarred drifter who had first appeared at her roadside stand 10 years ago. "Didn't think you'd come back," she said as he approached, her tone carefully neutral. "I told you I'd repay my debt," Elias replied, his voice steady but tinged with something softer, regret perhaps or admiration. "And I meant it." They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Elias broke the silence. "I've been monitoring the situation," he said. "Things seem stable, for now." Anika nodded. "It's not perfect, but it's better than it was." He studied her face, his gaze sharp yet gentle. "And you? Are you holding up?" She hesitated before answering. "Some days are harder than others. But I'm okay." Elias didn't press further. Instead, he gestured toward the milk cart. "That symbol, it suits you." Anika followed his gaze to the serpent swallowing its tail, now adorned with a drop of milk. "It represents renewal," she explained. "A cycle of resilience, of learning from the past instead of being trapped by it." Elias smiled faintly. "You've always understood symbols better than most." His comment caught her off guard. What do you mean? You recognize the coin I gave you all those years ago, he said. Even though you didn't know what it meant, you sensed it was important. That kind of intuition, it's rare. Before she could respond, a group of children ran past, laughing as they chased each other around the square. Their joy was infectious, drawing smiles even from Elias. Watching them, Anika felt a pang of longing, not for her own lost childhood, but for the future these kids might have in a town finally free of corruption. Later that afternoon, Elias joined Anika at the diner, where they sat in a quiet booth sipping coffee. The place was nearly empty, save for Carl flipping burgers in the kitchen and an elderly couple, sharing pie at the counter. "You never told me everything," Anika said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "About your family, about why you were running 10 years ago." Elias stirred his coffee slowly, his expression guarded. "There are parts of my story that aren't mine to share. My brother's crimes affected countless lives. I won't compound that by dragging innocent people into my past. But what about your life?" Anika pressed. "Not just the money or the power. What drives you? Why did you choose to help us instead of walking away?" For a long moment, Elias didn't answer. Then quietly he said, "Because of you." Anika blinked, startled. "Me? You saved me that day," he continued. "Not just with the milk bottle, but with the choice you made to give it freely. Even when you thought no one was watching, in a world where everyone takes, you gave. And that stayed with me." Her throat tightened. "I didn't know any of that when I gave you the milk." "That's exactly why it mattered," Elias said softly. "Mercy isn't transactional. It's instinctive, pure. You reminded me of that." The revelation left Anika speechless. She'd spent so long berating herself for her mistakes, for skimming cream, for hiding secrets, that she'd forgotten how even her smallest actions could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she couldn't imagine. As the weeks passed, Elias became a frequent visitor to Maple Ridge. He didn't stay long. His empire required constant attention, but he made it clear that the town held a special place in his heart. Projects he'd funded began to bear fruit. A state-of-the-art medical clinic opened its doors, offering free services to low-income families. A community garden sprouted behind the library, tended by volunteers of all ages, and scholarships were established to send local students to college. Anika found herself working closely with Elias on many of these initiatives, their partnership evolving into something deeper than gratitude or obligation. They shared meals, late-night conversations, and quiet moments watching the sunset over the fields, though neither spoke of it outright. A connection grew between them, one rooted in mutual respect and understanding. But Elias's presence also raised questions among the townsfolk. Some admired him, seeing him as a guardian angel who had rescued Maple Ridge from ruin. Others remained wary, unsure whether his intentions were truly altruistic or part of some larger plan. "He's dangerous," Mrs. Hargrove muttered one evening as she watched Elias speak with a group of farmers. "Men like him don't change overnight." Anika bristled. "He's done more for this town than anyone else ever has. And yet he leaves whenever it suits him," Mrs. Hargrove countered. "What happens when he decides we're no longer worth his time?" The question lingered in Anika's mind long after the conversation ended. Winter descended on Maple Ridge, blanketing the town in snow. The milk cart stood dormant, its polished wood gleaming under a layer of frost. Inside the diner, Anika served hot chocolate to bundled-up customers, her breath visible in the chilly air. Despite the cold, the atmosphere was warm, a testament to the bonds forged during the town's revival. One evening, as she locked up the diner, Elias appeared at her side. He wore a heavy coat, his scarf pulled tight against the wind. "Walk with me?" he asked. They strolled through the quiet streets, their boots crunching in the snow. After a while, Elias stopped near the milk cart, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone hesitant, "about the future, about what comes next for you, for me, for this town." Anika waited, sensing the gravity of his words. "I can't stay forever," he admitted. "My work requires me to travel, to oversee projects far beyond Maple Ridge. But I want to keep coming back, if you'll have me." Her heart raced. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he paused, searching for the right words, "that I see a life here, a life with you, if you're willing to take a chance on me." Tears welled in Anika's eyes. For so long, she'd carried the burden of responsibility alone, believing that love and happiness were luxuries she couldn't afford. But standing there, surrounded by the town she'd fought to save, she realized she deserved more than survival. She deserved a future filled with hope and possibility. "I'm willing," she whispered. Elias smiled, pulling her close as the snow swirled around them. Winter gave way to spring, and Maple Ridge awoke with renewed energy. Snow melted into streams that fed the newly planted fields, and buds appeared on trees that had stood bare for years. The town square buzzed with activity as people prepared for the annual renewal festival, a tradition revived in honor of the town's rebirth. Anika stood beside Elias at the center of it all, her hand brushing against his as they coordinated last-minute details. Together, they had become a symbol of hope for the community, not just as leaders but as partners who embodied resilience and trust. Their relationship wasn't without challenges. Old fears and scars still surfaced occasionally, but they faced them together, learning to lean on each other when the weight grew too heavy. On the morning of the festival, Anika walked through the square, marveling at how far they'd come. Booths lined the streets, offering homemade crafts, baked goods, and fresh produce from the community garden. Children darted between stalls, their laughter echoing off the buildings. At the heart of it all stood the milk cart, now adorned with garlands of wildflowers. Mrs. Hargrove approached, her knitting needles clicking as she surveyed the scene. "Looks like you've outdone yourself this time," she said gruffly, though there was a hint of pride in her voice. "Thanks to everyone pitching in," Anika replied with a smile. "It's not just me," Mrs. Hargrove snorted. "Don't sell yourself short, girl. You've got a knack for bringing people together." Before Anika could respond, Tommy Wilkins jogged up, holding a clipboard. "We need you over by the stage. They're ready to start the speeches." She nodded and turned to follow him, pausing only to glance back at Elias, who stood talking with a group of farmers. He caught her eye and smiled, a silent reassurance that steadied her nerves. As the festival unfolded, Anika delivered a speech that left the crowd buzzing with inspiration. She spoke of the hardships they'd overcome, the sacrifices made by so many, and the promise of a brighter future. But most importantly, she emphasized the power of unity, the idea that no one person could carry the burden of rebuilding alone. "When I was 16, she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I thought I had to save my family and later this town all by myself. I thought strength meant never asking for help. But I was wrong. Strength is knowing when to reach out. It's trusting others enough to share the load." Her words resonated deeply, drawing cheers and applause from the audience. When she stepped down from the stage, Elias met her halfway, pulling her into an embrace. "You're incredible," he murmured. "So are you," she replied, leaning into him. "This isn't just my story, it's ours." Later that evening, as fireworks lit up the sky, Anika found herself reflecting on how much had changed since the day she'd first met Elias. Back then, she'd been a frightened girl clinging to scraps of dignity, unsure if she'd survive another week. Now she was part of something greater, a movement, fueled by compassion and determination. But even as she celebrated, she knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be new challenges, new battles to fight. Yet for the first time in years, she felt equipped to face them, not because she was stronger or braver, but because she wasn't alone. A few weeks after the festival, an unexpected visitor arrived in Maple Ridge. It was a woman named Lydia Hart, a journalist known for exposing corruption and advocating for marginalized communities. She introduced herself to Anika outside the diner, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the bustling town. "I've heard remarkable things about what you've accomplished here," Lydia said, extending a hand. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" Anika hesitated but ultimately agreed, inviting Lydia to sit while Carl served them coffee. Over the next hour, Lydia peppered her with inquiries about the town's revival, Elias's involvement, and the role Anika had played in uniting the community. "You've done extraordinary work," Lydia remarked toward the end of their conversation. "But I have to ask, what happens when Elias leaves? Will the town crumble without him?" Anika bristled at the implication. "Maple Ridge isn't dependent on anyone, not even Elias. Yes, he helped us get started. But this town's strength comes from its people, from all of us." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "That's quite the statement. Do you really believe it?" "Yes," Anika said firmly, "because I've seen it happen. Though Lydia didn't press further, her skepticism lingered in Anika's mind long after their meeting ended. As summer approached, Elias announced plans to leave Maple Ridge for an extended business trip abroad. While he promised to return, the news cast a shadow over the town. Some residents worried his absence would derail their progress, while others feared losing the man who had become a cornerstone of their revival. Anika tried to reassure them and herself that Maple Ridge would endure. "We've built something strong," she told a group of concerned townsfolk during a town hall meeting. "Something that doesn't rely on any one person. We'll keep moving forward no matter what." Privately, however, she struggled with the impending separation. For months, Elias had been her anchor, her confidant, her partner in both leadership and love. The thought of facing challenges without him felt daunting. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of the house they now shared, Elias reached for her hand. "You're afraid I won't come back," he said softly. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "I'm afraid I won't be enough without you." He cupped her face, his gaze unwavering. "You've always been enough, Anika. Don't ever doubt that. And remember, this isn't goodbye. It's just until next time." Tears pricked her eyes, but she forced a smile. Until next time. Months passed, and Maple Ridge continued to thrive. Without Elias physically present, Anika took on more responsibilities, leaning heavily on the support of friends and neighbors. To her surprise, the town rallied around her, proving that the foundation they'd built was indeed sturdy. Meanwhile, Elias stayed in touch through letters and occasional visits, his words filled with encouragement and affection. In one letter, he wrote, "You've taught me that true legacy isn't about wealth or power. It's about leaving behind something meaningful, something that inspires others to dream bigger, reach farther, and love deeper." Inspired by his words, Anika launched a project to document Maple Ridge's transformation, a book chronicling the struggles, triumphs, and lessons learned along the way. Contributions poured in from across the community, each story adding depth and richness to the narrative. When the book was finally published, it became a testament, not just to Anika's journey, but to the collective spirit of Maple Ridge. Copies were distributed throughout the country, inspiring other struggling towns to pursue their own revivals. On the day of the book's release, Anika returned to the milk cart. Now a permanent fixture in the town square, she placed a copy on the counter, its cover emblazoned with the serpent and milk symbol. As she traced the design with her fingers, she felt a profound sense of peace. Elias joined her moments later, having returned earlier than expected. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as they watched the sun set over the fields. "We did it," she whispered. "No," he corrected gently. "You did it. I just followed your lead." Anika smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face whatever came next, with courage, with faith, and with love. And so, under the watchful eyes of the milk cart symbol, Maple Ridge embraced a future defined not by debts owed but by dreams fulfilled.